Hello and good afternoon, morning or evening, my friends. Here we are with another episode of Strange Things, State by State, whatever you want to call it. Some of you asked for it, and, well, now you're getting it. This is some strange and scary things from Pennsylvania. This is by no means a huge documented or cataloged site of every strange or spooky thing from the state, just a few of the ones that we found the most interesting. And one that would be incredibly historically insensitive of me not to include. So, let's just go and see what we can find in the old Commonwealth, shall we? The Western State Correctional Institution in Pittsburgh. It was in 1826 that the doors and cells of the Western State Penitentiary were opened. This was the result of a booming period of growth for the Pittsburgh area. With a growing population always comes a growth in the number of crimes committed. It didn't take long to populate the prison with the unseemly type that had taken up residence in the budding metropolis and the surrounding area. Nor was the Western Pen alone where it opened for operation. Within a few years, Philadelphia was hosting the Eastern State Correctional Institution. Officially known as a Jordan Correction Facility, it may be better known by some of its nicknames such as Western Pen, Western Penitentiary, or simply The Wall. The site is located just a few miles from downtown Pittsburgh, and was the first correctional facility built west of the Atlantic Plain, and began to earn its notoriety as a major Civil War prison in 1863 to 1864. While at the time of the institution's closing in 2017, it was a low to medium security prison. It was, for a long stint of its operation, a maximum security facility. During the Civil War era, no fewer than 118 Confederate prisoners of war were housed at the prison from 1863 until 1864, when the majority of them were transferred to a military fort in New Jersey. Not all of them made it, however, as despite conditions at the time being considered good, at least 8 of them would die in the institution, one of them as he was attempting to escape. The facility continued to operate, housing some maximum security inmates, all the way until 2005, when the facility was shut down and the inmates transferred to SCI Fayette. It was reopened in 2007, and this time it housed low to medium security inmates that required substance abuse counseling, up until it was closed again a decade later in 2017. Among others, a few of the more famous inmates to pass through and serve time in this prison include George Fagley, who was the notorious leader of a sex cult that was transferred to the facility. In 1983, 2 known associates of Fagley's drowned on the premise in what was believed to be an attempt to break the cult leader out. Not long after the attempt, he was transferred to SCI Huntington. Alexander Berkman, the man that unsuccessfully tried to assassinate Henry Clay Fick. He served 14 years of his sentence in the facility. The experience there led to the publishing of his first book, Prison Memoirs of an Anarchist, and Gerald Mayo, the man that filed lawsuits against Satan and his servants in the United States District Court. And while the original Western Pen is no longer standing, the ghosts from its past continue to roam the National Aviary that now stands where the prison once was. Now, while we have very little information or documentation on deaths that occurred in the prison, the apparitions that have been spotted over the years almost always seem to be from the Civil War era. And we do know that at least 8 Confederate POWs died in the prison during that time of conflict. It's entirely possible that the spirits roaming the halls are the lingering specters of these POWs, as they are often identified by their Confederate uniforms. With the heavy number of people that roam the aviary during its daylight hours, it's in the twilight hours and beyond that most of the sightings seem to take place. By the after-hours employees that come in to do their work after the tourists have all retired for the night. While it is unknown if these spirits just prefer the nighttime hours, or if during the day they just manage to get lost amongst the crowd, one thing is for certain. When night falls, these ghostly apparitions will come out to wander the grounds. perhaps they want to enjoy the bird exhibits on a bit more private basis. Or perhaps they're trapped in the final days of their lives, reliving their time in the Western Penitentiary for eternity. Now, the most commonly reported phenomena are the ghostly apparitions. Don't think that all of these spirits are quiet. Stories do come around every so often of strange noises of ghostly footsteps trotting the halls, mysterious loud bangs coming from certain areas. Other people have even reported the feeling of being watched, followed and stalked by the footsteps, as if they were being either herded off by an unseen entity or maybe just closely supervised and monitored to ensure their work is up to standards. Even spirits, like a nice, clean place to dwell, I suppose. I mean, who doesn't? One employee at the aviary even reportedly witnessed a radio turn itself on, then off, and then back on again. While it is widely reported to be haunted, it's one place that does not offer a ghost tour, nor can you book a ghost hunting expedition there. I'm not sure if this is for the sake of preserving the integrity of the site, or perhaps more out of the concern for the feathered beings that don't have the luxury of going home after a long day of being gawked at by strangers. Either way, from everything I've found, whether you enjoy the spooky and supernatural, or just like seeing some rare and exotic birds, it might be worth a visit to the old site of the Western Pen, if you ever find yourself in Pittsburgh. The Mütter Museum. Possibly one of the creepiest places on Earth, number 7 to be exact according to the Travel Channel. The Mütter Museum is a real collection of oddities and the macabre. Billed as a medical history and science museum, the place houses a lot of medical and scientific history. Named for Thomas Dent Mütter, who in 1858 donated $30,000 and his own collection of 1,700 pieces of his private bone museum plaster casts, medical illustrations, and other pathological artifacts. The goal of the institute was to educate medical students and invited guests of college fellows. It was not open to non-fellows until the late 1970s. Part of the College of Physicians of Philadelphia ever since the facility's opening, the college has continued to expand the collection and bring in more exhibits to the place. It houses numerous medical instruments, including Civil War amputation kits, wax models, one of which is of a giant colon, anatomical and pathological specimens, right down to the always classy stillborn fetus. The college itself is not a teaching organization, and refers to itself as a scientific body dedicated to the advancement of science and medicine. With over 37,000 pieces, as of 2023, only about 10% were on display. This excludes the literary collection housed in the Historical Medical Library. The various items and artifacts were acquired on a global scale, with college fellows buying the various specimens and instruments, and then being fully reimbursed for the cost of purchasing the item in question, as well as any cost associated with travel or other expenditures incurred during the acquisition of said item. According to Ella Ward, who was the curator from 1939 until 1957, this meant that the Mütter Museum Committee proceeded to spend Dr. Mütter's money like sailors on shore leave. The museum was given a grant by the Pew Center for Arts and Heritage in 2023, in order to research the history of the human remains collection in order to better understand how each specimen and set of remains came to be in the possession of the museum. It also hosted a town hall-style meeting in order to discuss the future of the institution, with the first meeting being conducted on November 17th of 2023. Now, let's talk about some of the exhibits that are actually housed within the museum. We'll start with the skeletons on display, which is a nice change from skeletons in the closet. Henry Raymond Eastlack, which is a fully articulated skeleton. It's the remains of a man who suffered from FOP, also called Munchmeyer disease. The American Giant, the tallest skeleton on display in North America, standing at 7 feet 6 inches, or 224 centimeters. Mary Ashbury. Ms. Ashbury was a woman with achondroplasia and died after childbirth as a result of medical negligence in 1856. The Hurdle Skull Collection. A massive collection of skulls donated from James Hurdle, who collected the specimens in order to prove the diversity of Europeans and disprove the racial science of phrenology. Other skulls and crania. There are 10 skulls and 5 crania on display that show extensive syphilic involvement. Most of these specimens came from Dr. Mutter's own collection. The collection also plays host to 1,700 wet specimens. This incredibly macabre collection houses teratological specimens, cysts, and even tumors. Some of the notable exhibits would be the preserved heart of Robert Pendarvis, who was a living donor suffering from acromegaly, intestinal specimens from the 1849 cholera outbreak, and tattooed skin dating from the 19th and early 20th centuries. Some of the more interesting, if slightly unnerving exhibits would be the numerous wax figures on display throughout the museum. Most of these were made by Tramond of Paris and Joseph Town of London. These figures showcase all manner of pathology in the human body, and were meant to be used in cases where cadavers were difficult to obtain or preserve. It's even said that some moulages have human bones in some of their works. Of all these figures, one of the most famous would be the last known wax figure of Madame de Monchi, a woman who had a human horn removed after 6 years of growth sometime in the 19th century. But even all of these don't cover the wide range of strange and slightly gross, Tom's opinion, exhibits. A few of the other really interesting things housed by the museum include half of Albert Einstein's brain, a malignant tumor removed from the hard palate of President Grover Cleveland, the plaster death cast and conjoined liver of the original Siamese conjoined twins, Ang and Chang Bunker, and a piece of thoracic tissue removed from John Wilkes Booth. So, with all of this laid out there, I will tell you that I couldn't find any real documentation of alleged hauntings, but guests do often report feeling deeply disturbed, dizzy, nauseous, or other uncomfortable and unpleasant sensations. But in a place that houses so many disturbing things, I feel like it'd be very easy to get overwhelmed and possibly start to feel anxious or even have some kind of a miniature fit of some kind. The questions I have, of course, would be one of morality. However, science isn't always about ethics. It's about results. Now, if most of these, quote, specimens had consented before their death to be a case study for the college or something, that is certainly one thing. But seeing as how the museum was founded in the 19th century, I think a lot of us have some kind of understanding that, in those days of science and medicine, grave robbery was incredibly common. And a lot of those skeletal figures in science classrooms were the remains of someone that had been taken unceremoniously from their final resting place. Perhaps this little factoid from history has something to do with the current investigation of the museum's many exhibits, and the discussion about the Institute's future might be on the table right now. Maybe the investigations are to determine just how legitimately some of the remains were obtained. When you have thousands upon thousands of these kinds of things in your collection, I think it's fair to say that more than a few of them were probably acquired by nefarious and illegal means, and that some of these specimens were undoubtedly stolen from their place of final rest, and then turned into something of a spectacle. First for students and fellows, and later on for the general public. The Cave of Kelpius. So, I'm sure that just about anyone listening to this is familiar with, at the very least, the concept of a doomsday cult. I would name a few, but that would probably lead to some kind of slippery slope and completely derail what we really want to talk about right now. which is the first doomsday cult in North America. Johannes Kelpius was a very interesting guy and had a wide range of things that he dabbled in. He was a writer, a musician, and a mystic. He was very intrigued by the occult, astronomy, and botany. He was born in 1667 in Transylvania as Johann Kelp. When he went to the University of Altdorf, his name was Latinized to Johannes Kelpius. By the time he was 22, he had earned a master's in theology and had published several works. It was while he was at the university that he had drawn into pietism and become a follower of Johann Jacob Zimmermann. Zimmermann himself was a mathematician, astronomer, and until the position ended in 1685, a cleric. By this time, they had built a bit of a following, and just before the group set out to travel to the New World, Zimmermann died suddenly and Kelpius became the de facto leader of the group. They had collectively decided to resettle themselves in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania because it had built a reputation as being very religiously tolerant. Kelpius himself had become convinced that a new heavenly kingdom would be born somewhere in the wilderness. Pennsylvania was the edge of the western wilderness at the time, and was religiously accepting to those with differing beliefs. And so he had decided that this was the best place for him and his followers to settle. Kelpius's travel diary has been preserved, and, according to it, when the group set out for Philadelphia, there were about 40 devoted followers that made the voyage over with Johannes. When they did reach the New World, the cult did not stay in Philadelphia for long, before setting out for Germantown and then on to Wissahickon. The group, the Society of the Woman in the Wilderness, often referred to as the Mystics of Wissahickon Creek, settled in the forested area along the aforementioned creek. Speculation abounds as to if they practiced some kind of communal kind of living or lived solitary lives in the many caves alongside the creek. Those who did live amongst the order did live their lives in celibacy and meditation, however. It was in one of these caves that Kelpius himself spent much of his time meditating and came to the conclusion that, in 1694, the world was going to come to a terrible end. His followers believed in him completely, and it was in the Cave of Kelpius that they all gathered together and awaited the prophesied end of days to come. Even after the fatal prediction had failed to come to pass, this did not shake the faith of the group, and they continued to live in their solitary way, studying the stars and trying to find any answers as to just when the day of judgment may arrive. The group of pietists did a lot of good among the community, such as building of schools for neighborhood children. They also shared their medical knowledge with the other settlers and often held public worship services. Doing these kinds of things did attract a few new followers to the group, but especially after Kelpius himself died in 1708, the group began a steady decline. Johannes did not think that he was suffering a physical death, but was transitioning on to another stage of life. Some people believe that Kelpius had a philosopher's stone in his possession, and that just before his death he ordered the stone to be cast into the Wissahickon, or Sturhill. Perhaps it would be worth going out there to that old creek and walking its banks, just on the off chance that there's a philosopher's stone lying on its bed somewhere in the old forest of Pennsylvania. Gettysburg. Gettysburg is an incredibly historic place for several reasons. It was the site of one of the most pivotal battles during the Civil War, one that completely turned the tide in the conflict. The battlefield is also the site of one of the most famous speeches delivered by any leader in history, with Abraham Lincoln's Gettysburg Address, and it's one of the most haunted places in America. But with so much bloodshed, I think it wouldn't come as no surprise that the old battlefield would harbor its share of restless spirits. From July 1st through the 3rd of 1863, The Battle of Gettysburg was raging between the Northern Union Army and the Southern Rebel Army of the Confederates. Little did anyone know at the time just how pivotal this battle was going to be in this conflict, but the men locked in combat certainly knew it was one of the bloodiest battles they had ever seen. And many of them by this point were very grizzled and hardened veterans. By the time the fight was over, Gettysburg had become the site of the costliest and most deadly battle of the entire war, and the deadliest in American history, with over 50,000 Americans dead by the time all was said and done. This battle would change the tide and place momentum firmly in the camp of the Union Army, who would go on to win the war, resulting in the freeing of the slaves and marking a new era in American history, and arguably the history of the world. But the legacy of Gettysburg would also live on for other reasons, more supernatural reasons. For the end of the battle was not the end for those that had died in the struggle, and to this day they continue to live out that incredibly violent battle over and over again, possibly for eternity. Although it would be a bit narrow-minded to think that it's just the ghosts of the soldiers that died in the battle that linger and still roam the streets and fields of Gettysburg. There are numerous allegedly haunted places in this very old community, and most of them are on that famous ghost tour that you can go on in town. So, much in the spirit of the first entry onto this little list, we're going to break down some of the most interesting places one can go for a good scare while touring Gettysburg. First up is Jenny Wade's house. Mary Virginia Wade's story is a great place to start on this little journey, as she is the only civilian to have been killed during the famous Battle of Gettysburg. Born in 1843, Jenny Wade was only 20 at the time of her death when she was struck by a stray bullet. Jenny's life had always been troubled, with her father largely not in the picture, so on July 1st, the battle began. Jenny and her mother headed to the home of the eldest Wade child. However, mere hours after arriving at Georgia Anna's home, the sounds of battle and gunshots filled the air once more as the Wades found themselves again in the middle of the fighting. For 2 days, the family weathered the storm, and then on July 3rd, tragedy came in the form of a stray bullet striking her in the back, passing through her heart, and killing her instantly as she prepared to bake bread. But the tragedy goes a bit further than that. When the war had begun in 1861, Jenny Wade was engaged to a young corporal. Just 2 weeks before her death, her fiancé had been injured grievously. She had never received word of what happened to him, nor had he ever gotten word of Jenny's death, before he too passed away from his injuries. There's a legend that says if you go to the home where Jenny was killed and place your finger through one of the bullet holes in the door that were penetrated at the time of Jenny's death, that you'll become engaged not long after. And yes, one of these doors is still in place to this day. Today, the Jenny Wade house is the Jenny Wade Museum, and tours are available to those that wish to step back into the 19th century and see what time was like at the time that Jenny Wade died. The house is largely the same as it was in those days, right down to Jenny's bloodstains on the floor where she collapsed after the fatal gunshot. It's not uncommon to hear about people witnessing her apparition walking around the house, or even roaming the nearby countryside. Second is the National Homestead at Gettysburg. With so much of the lore of possibly the most haunted place in America being attached to that infamous Civil War battle, one could almost be forgiven for associating the ghost of Gettysburg with the soldiers that once fought and died over those 3 days of hell. However, in the most haunted town in the US, the most haunted place of all does not have a single soldier associated with it. And that place is the National Homestead of Gettysburg, or, as it used to be known, the Gettysburg Orphanage. Founded in the wake of the Battle of Gettysburg in 1867, the homestead was originally prosperous. But after the original headmistress was replaced by Rosa J. Carmichael, the history of the orphanage took a turn for the worse. The incredibly sadistic Carmichael built a dungeon to discipline unruly children. These are the kinds of tales that have given the homestead a notorious reputation. The orphanage was, at some point, turned into the National Soldier Museum, where tours were guided and narrated. This gave the guests a chance to experience the dungeon for themselves. However, the museum has been closed to the public since November of 2014. With so many dark things having happened here, it's not a shocking turn of events that many paranormal investigators have come to the homestead in hopes of capturing evidence of the lingering spirits of the children, and even the cruel headmistress. For over a century, tales of ghostly children roaming the building and grounds have circulated in Gettysburg and beyond. And of course, the most ominous place of all, the dungeon, is said to have an overwhelming feeling of oppression, with some people saying that being just in the room makes them physically ill. These are just a couple of the most famously haunted spots in a very historic and undoubtedly haunted town. Whether haunted by actual spirits or just by the memory of the blood that was shed here could be up for debate, but either way, Gettysburg is definitely one of the most haunted places in America. And if you like the spooky side of life, it would definitely be worth a visit. And worth exploring, if for no other reason than to take in the rich history of that town. So, that, my friends, was our second collection of strange and scary things in state by state, however you want to look at it. I personally like calling it strange and scary state by state. I think Tom called it something else at the beginning, probably strange things. I don't know. Strange things, state by state, however you want to look at it. We're having fun with this, and I know some of you don't like research content, but really, this is just for the fun of it. You know, I gotta put things in here so I don't end up getting burned out on the standard, normal stories that I do. Not saying that I'm risking burnout, but these kinds of things make it to where I really don't risk burnout because I get to do something more fun. Plus, I get to work with a good friend of mine, Tom K. He shows up in the comments. I think he goes by Radical Mongoose on here, something like that, or The Mongoose. I'm not 100% sure what his name here is on YouTube. But he's on the Discord server, so you'll find him there. My point is, he's a good friend. He loves writing. He is an author, and his links for his Amazon stuff are in the description down below. But I like doing this with him because it helps him kind of just get a feel for more research stuff and get the creative juices flowing, so to speak. It helps me because I get to do some new things for the channel that some of you really do enjoy. And it helps you because you guys get more content, I suppose, and get to learn things about states. Last time was Michigan, this time was Pennsylvania. I believe the next one will be Virginia. I think. Don't quote me on that. We have a list, but it's more like he has a list, and I keep asking, hey, what's next? And he keeps telling me, and I keep forgetting because I'm terrible at logistics. So eventually he and I are just going to have to put together like a Google Doc with all the lists and the things that we want to research, and I can maybe add to it too. So anyways. Hopefully you all enjoyed this collection of strange and scary things in Pennsylvania. If you did, please do hit that like button. If you're new to the channel and enjoyed what you heard, please do consider subscribing. I do new scary stories, typically 3 times a week. Occasional compilations, sleep compilations on Fridays or Saturdays, depending on when they get uploaded. And just a lot. I do a lot. So hopefully if you like a lot of content and scary stories, you'll subscribe. You can also leave me a comment down below with your thoughts on these write-ups, on the things that we found in Pennsylvania, and on whatever state you want us to cover. We've had a lot of recommendations: Ohio, Colorado, Virginia. Obviously, we'll probably do Kansas and Missouri at some point in time, most likely Minnesota as well. One state we will never cover is Iowa, so if you're from Iowa, I'm sorry, but you're from Iowa. That's a joke. I want to make it very clear that's a joke. Sorry. I don't dislike Iowan people. I'm just not a fan of Iowa because driving through it's a pain. Neither here nor there. Yeah, leave a comment down below with your thoughts, what you thought of these. If you have other things you'd like us to cover, like legends. I know somebody wanted Filipino legends on Spotify, so I gotta talk to Tom about that too. You can also join Patreon memberships, get early access to content like this and other things, depending on what you sign up for. You can also do a super thanks, which is a tip to the channel. Never expected, always appreciated. Check out the website, astheravendreams.com, where you can send in your scary stories, find me on all my social media platforms, and listen to the podcast and other platforms like Spotify, Audible, etc. All those amazing things. You can also email your stories, astheravendreams@gmail.com. I'm pretty receptive to emails, so. All said, friends. Hope you have a beautiful rest of your week. Hope I see you again here very soon. But until then, remember that you are loved, you are valid, and you are important, and the world is a better place with you in it. Never forget that, okay? Until next time, much love, and sleep well.